Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, I'm the host here, and my guest today is Jenn Lampen, designer from behind Synaptic Stitches. Hi, Jen.
Hi,
Well,
thank
you
you
know
so
what?
much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So we actually have met because you are a fellow Bostonian now. You've moved recently to Boston, so you're
Yes.
my local designer now. um, how did you start, before you start about how you started designing, how did you start with knitting? When did that happen?
So when I was a kid, my mom knits and crochets and sews, and so my mom taught me to knit. But I think I probably, knit a couple of squares, and I didn't know how to cast on, and I didn't know how to bind off. And she would hand me something, and I would knit all, a few rows, and that was the end of it. And I didn't do much with it as a kid. I did a little bit more with crocheting, and then really stopped both by the time I was in high school. Um, and then when I was in grad school, actually, I think it's kind of an embarrassing story. I had an iPad that had been given to me as a college graduation gift, and it broke. And I suddenly realized how much time I'd been wasting doing silly things on my iPad. And I was like, okay, I have all this free time now, and I want to do something more useful with it, more productive with it. And I had, a few days earlier seen that there was a local yarn shop um, block off the main street across from my university, and they had a big sign out saying they had Knit 101 classes. And I was like, okay, this was fun. I want to do something, with my hands and get back into trying fiber arts. And I took their Knit 101 class, and it clicked immediately with me, and knitting just made sense, and my brain loved it. And I don't think I've put down knitting needles since.
Well, I have a question about it, right? So I have similar story because I learned to knit the same thing, like knit and purl when I was probably 7 or 8. My grandma taught me one summer and I knitted for like a few weeks and that was the end of it. And then I came to it like a few years ago, right? But like when I started knitting, I felt like I had some muscle memory. Like I didn't even need to try. Like it just clicked like immediately. Like I just watched one YouTube video and I knew how to knit.
Yeah.
Did you feel the same way? Did you feel like you still had those skills from your childhood?
I do think it came back really easily. And I immediately was taught to knit continental because they handed me the needles and the yarn, and I immediately picked up the yarn in my left hand, I think from crocheting as a kid.
Nice.
So I definitely had some muscle memory left that made it easier to pick up.
So what was your first knitting project in that class? Do you remember?
So they have you do some like basic, just little swatches to, you know, learn knitting and purling and some basic increases and decreases. And then the project at the end of the class is a hat. So
Well, I have this like, when I look at your designs, they're probably like the most complicated things I've ever seen. So what was that progression like? Because you're going from like simple squares and hat to designing like really complicated, using complicated techniques and designing these complicated things. Like how did that challenge happen?
I've always gotten bored easily. I've always needed a lot to keep my mind engaged. And knitting just made sense to me. It always clicked. It always was easy. So, I knit a hat, I knit a few more hats, and a few months after I learned to knit, I went to the local yarn shop owner and was like, I'm bored knitting hats. I need a project that I can do in, that's not going to be finished in a weekend. And we looked on Ravelry, and I ended up knitting this really intricate cabled jacket from Brooklyn tweed. And that was my first garment. And I just always, just jumped straight in, no hesitation to knit something complex. And then I feel like, maybe a year or two after I started knitting, I feel like brioche was getting really popular, and there were lots of classes on learning to do brioche. And I remember being in a class at the local yarn shop, and she demonstrated the technique, and immediately I went off and did it, and everyone else was sitting there going, huh? And you know, so that worked for me. And so I've sort of had these two loves of brioche and cables. Um, and a friend gave me a gift a few years back of a pattern for Christmas. It was a pattern and yarn to make it for a hat that Nancy Marchant designed that used the brioche cable technique that I use. And it sort of was this like light bulb that went off in my head of like, oh, you can combine these two things that I love. And so that was like one of my biggest inspirations, that suddenly, okay, I can put these things together in ways that nobody has really been doing.
You're a designer, right? There is practical part of it because you have, like, you're selling your designs, so you have to find the audience for it.
Yes.
And then there is your artistic side of it, because you want to do what interests you, what you find, the inspiration that you find, right? Mm-hmm. How do you combine those two sides, or do you just disregard one and follow the other?
So I part of it is I just recognize that I have my niche and I'm not going to be for everyone. And there are people who are going to look at my designs and go, oh, that's too complicated and not for me. And that's okay. I don't have to be for everyone. But one of the things I do push is trying to encourage what I call fearless knitting, and trying to get people to sort of go out of their comfort zone and try something new and realize that, sorry, my cats are zooming around by my feet. So I want people to not look at something and think, I couldn't possibly do that, because really it's slipping stitches and knitting and purling, you know, it's just putting it together in ways you haven't seen before. And so, you know, I want people to step out of their comfort zone, try something new, and approach something that they maybe would have thought was scary. And I feel like, you know, my favorite example is when I went to test knit the sweater that I'm wearing, which is the braided bread sweater. One of the women who volunteered had knit before, but her primary craft was crochet. She'd never done brioche. She'd really not done more than like knitting scarves. And she saw it and said, I want to do that. And I went, well, okay, we might need to like help you find some resources to learn, but let's jump in, let's do it. And she knit it no problem. Right. You know, so I do think about,
yeah, because I feel like a lot of people that don't know that something is difficult jump in and manage it somehow, right? Because like if you think about it, the reality is it's very limited amount of stitches that we're talking about.
Right.
There's like few basic stitches. You have your knit, you have your purl, the knit two together, the knit three together, yarn over, right? And everything else is a variation of using those stitches. So if you're like capable of knitting and purling, you're pretty much capable of everything.
Exactly.
As long as you're patient with yourself and as long as you sort of like understand that you can make a mistake and that's fine, and you can learn how to fix those mistakes. Like I feel like we're unstoppable as knitters.
Right. And you know, I do know that for some people they need to like dip their toe in before they go crazy. And so I do have a couple of patterns. I have a scarf pattern that's already out, the brioche cable arrows scarf. Wow, what a bad name. But I couldn't come up with anything better at the time. And I have a cowl pattern that I have finished the design, and I'm just writing it up now, that are more simple and are intended to sort of be an introduction to brioche cables. So if you haven't done it before and the idea of something like this sweater that's all over cables is a little too intimidating, that's a place you can start and learn the techniques and practice a little bit before you have to do something more complicated.
Right. So when you started selling your designs on Ravelry, what was the reception?
I am not someone who has put a lot of time into, you know, growing a following, and I don't have, you know, I don't naturally live my life on the internet and social media. So it was pretty quiet at first. but I'm definitely, seeing it growing, and already have, a few people who, I've got a woman who's test knitting my second sweater now, and has seen some pictures of my third sweater and has already, volunteered to test that. And so it's exciting to see that fan base growing, that there are people who come back for design after design.
Right. Is it hard for you to find the test knitters?
Um, it's with every test, it's getting easier. It was really hard at first. My first pattern, I think I had 6 people sign up and I had 1 person actually finish it. And I'm getting more and more, and this sweater that I'm testing now, which is the Hidden Forest sweater that's behind me, is which will probably be releasing about the time this video comes out. That's the first project where I've actually had to turn people away who wanted to test, where I had more testers volunteer than I could accommodate. So it's getting easier, but it can be hard to find testers.
Who is your ideal tester? Like, how do you pick them?
I kind of want a mix of people, because I do want my patterns to be accessible to, people who don't automatically think of themselves as advanced knitters. So I like having some people who are saying, oh, I haven't done brioche before, but I want to try it. And I love having those people, and I like getting their feedback of, what help do they need to get there and to be able to finish it. But I also like having, some people who are more experienced and can, give me more feedback about the flow of the pattern and that kind of thing. So I don't think I have one ideal tester. I like having a big range of different experience levels. I guess, I like having people who will communicate a lot with me and share pictures and be enthusiastic about the process. It's great if at the end, you can give me a data dump and say, okay, here's all the things I did and here's my pictures at the end. But I love the community of the knitting world, and I love, being able to chat with people about my designs. So if you want to talk to me the whole way through, that makes me happy.
Right. How do you decide how much you're going to explain in the pattern? Like, how do you stop yourself from over explaining, or how do you know that you didn't under explain?
I think that's sort of an evolving process for me. I haven't been doing this that long, and I can already look back at, this sweater that I released in August and say, oh, there's things I would change about how I explained that. I think my approach is sort of to give some basic explanation of all the stitches, give some notes at the beginning if people need some more thoughts about, how brioche is structured or how to count rows or things like that. And then trying to provide, some supplementary links to videos, whether they're my videos or, sometimes I think someone else has already made a great video to explain a technique. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. To, give them more support if what I've written out isn't enough. But not everyone needs that in-depth explanation. So sort of trying to balance having it there if you want to go look for more. But I don't have to beat you over the head with every little instruction.
I was having this conversation with Rastus Shu, like he was saying how, because he lives in Taiwan, like his first influence was the Japanese patterns, and they're very concise. It's basically just chart, right, with the very minimal explanation. But then some of the Western patterns, it's almost like storytelling. Like you write the whole, like what inspired you, what gave you idea of the project, and then you go into like very detailed explanation of everything. Are you a storyteller?
I don't know that I'm a storyteller. I find like writing that romance at the start of the pattern to be like one of the hardest things for me. I really struggle with figuring out what to say about each pattern. I definitely find like I have a group of friends who were my social knitting group at the first yarn store where I learned to knit, and we've still, you know, stayed close even though I've moved 3 times since then. And we get together on Zoom every week, and I bounce a lot of ideas off of them about, okay, I'm thinking about saying this way, or this new pattern, I'd have to write out the instructions in 2 different ways if I wanted to include this, or, you know, should I just have the charts? Should I just have the written instructions? And I'm always sending them questions of, you know, you as a knitter, what would you want to see? So I crowdsource a lot of my explanations.
Well, talking of communities, so recently you joined Inbal Gross and Scott Strong Wallace and Duke of Nico, who were all guests of my channel.
Yes.
In the YouTube channel where you do challenges, challenging each other and trying to step outside of your comfort zone, but also inviting people who watch you to join into the challenges. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to join that gang?
I think, you know, I had connected with Inbal through Melissa Liepman's design summit, and we'd been chatting, and I saw that she was doing it, and it just sounded like, you know, a cool idea and another way to get to know people and connect more with the knitting community. And you know, for me, knitting has always been about community, always been about socialization. And I think moving during the pandemic and focusing on knitting and not being in a traditional 9-to-5 job right now, I can feel pretty isolated. So anything that I can do to connect to more people and to have more socialization is something that I, you know, will reach out for. So the opportunity to, you know, have 3 new friends that I could connect with was appealing.
Right. What was the hardest thing about recording that first episode?
I think Scott was, you know, used to, you know, he has his own YouTube channel, so he was, you know, used to talking to camera, and I think the other 3 of us were just a little nervous and a little tongue-tied at first. And we also, you know, you can't tell, obviously Inbal has done a good editing job, but we've now recorded 2 episodes, and both times we finished and we're like, we meant for this to be about 45 minutes and we've been talking for 2 hours. Oops. So we're not very good at like keeping it concise or staying on point. We just end up talking for a while. So, you know, it can be hard to stay focused.
What do you like about it? Like, what do you like about that interaction?
I mean, I think it's people who I wouldn't have connected with otherwise, and getting to hear other perspectives, other voices, and, you know, think about things in ways. And also, you know, the challenge structure is fun, that it, you know, I'm very focused on knitting my own designs and getting, there's not enough time in the day to produce all the things my brain is coming up with. So I haven't taken much time to try other techniques or knit other people's designs. So having something that, you know, forces me to stop and think about other kinds of ways of knitting for a little bit is a nice break. I always like to sort of think about how to flex my brain in a different way, and not always just be focused on thinking about one thing.
How do you come up with the inspirations for your designs?
So as I said, I had this hat pattern from Nancy Marchant that showed the idea of brioche cables. And I had knit a shawl pattern by Leila Mary Francombe, who's an Australian designer and does a lot of brioche. And she was the first designer whose stuff I'd seen that used syncopated brioche. So switching which color is the knitted color and which is the purled. And those 2 ideas just clicked together in my head. And So I wanted to use brioche and cables to like play with color transitions. And I also have really loved like classic cable sweaters. So some of the ideas of like old sweaters with where you see like the cable patterns that might have like seed stitch inside a cabled diamond or something, or like some inspiration for doing some of these diamonds and the cable patterns inside them. So I like looking at like traditional motifs and seeing like how could I put a brioche spin on this, and so that's been a lot of like what has started the ball rolling. And then I sort of I feel like I get one idea and I start going with it, and then 12 more pop up of like, well, what if I changed this, and what if I changed that, and they just sort of keep coming off of each other.
Can you show an example of your design, like when one thing leads into another?
So one of the things I did in this design, which far enough back that you can't really see the details, but I put some of the decreases on the back side of the yoke so that the columns of brioche stitches just end, and used that as part of the design features. And I really liked that idea. So then I wanted to play with some of the diamond motifs, but rather than doing the increases and decreases on the front side of the fabric, I wanted to do it on the back side so that I had these lines coming and going out of them. So this is a sweater pattern that I'm still writing up that has not come out yet. But then I started doing these different diamond motifs that then used the increases on the back side of the fabric.
That's so pretty.
Thank you. And then another thing that sort of came out of my mind was, okay, I like doing these, playing with color and shifting color and doing these brioche cables. What if I pushed a third color into that, which brought me to this hat.
Oh my God. So this is 3-color brioche.
Yes.
Okay.
I swear it's not that terrifying. It's basically brioche combined with mosaic knitting. So you end up with floats on the inside like you would with mosaic or fair isle.
Right. Is that hard to explain? Like in writing the pattern, do you find it's hard to explain how to do it?
I didn't think it was too bad to explain, but it's with my tech editor right now, so we'll see if she thinks that my explanation is sufficient. I haven't actually had anyone have to try and knit it yet, so we'll see how that goes.
I mean, that sounds very interesting, actually. It's something I would love to try it at some point.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Something I didn't even like know existed until this interview, so I'm like,
yeah,
something new.
I'd seen some other ways to play with brioche that I actually haven't tried, but I've seen, knitted fabric with multiple colors, adding a third color in, and I just wanted to try, doing it in a different way that would create a different end result.
Right.
So.
Well, I want to ask you about your opinion on what's a real design, because like you influenced by other designers, right? You influenced by stitches that already exist, and you're trying to see how you can play with the existing stitches and make it into something new. What's, in your opinion, is the original design? Like, and what's the, it's like, how much credit do you give to others, or do you feel like you have to give to others, versus like if you use stitches that exist in a new for you way, this is your design? Like, where do you stand on that? And I'm not judging by any means, I'm just trying to make it, I'm trying to come, it's like, be in peace with myself with this thing. I've been thinking a lot about that. So what's your opinion on the matter?
I think there's sort of only so many ways you can do things. There's only so many stitches out there. Everything really is combinations of knits and purls and slipping stitches. And so the idea that, everything you do has to be completely original for it to be your own design just seems
unreasonable.
Like, that's just not going to happen.
Right.
So you know, if I open up somebody else's book and, you know, just change one little thing and then write out the same design, like that's not original. But to me, you know, if I can't come up, if I have an idea that's, you know, even if it's inspired by something somebody else did, but like if I'm not looking at their reference materials, if I'm not, cats are fighting, if I'm not you know, copying their instructions or anything, if I'm, you know, using my own ideas and generating the pattern myself, you know, even if two people come up with things that look very similar, you know, you can both independently have a very similar idea, and I don't think that that's inherently wrong or that one person had to have copied the other.
Right. Actually, it's funny because I was interviewing Suzanne Bryan, and she used to review for the American Knitting Guild Association. She used to be one of the reviewers, and she said that one time they got two absolutely identical sweaters because they were like asked to design sweater with the cable pattern, and they were like just happened to be with the same exact cable and the same exact color, and they didn't even know each other or like off each other, and it just happened to be that way, you know. So it's like things like this happen all the time, I guess,
Right.
because it's like existing cables, you know, so you can combine them just in so many variations, you know.
Right. Or, you know, there's only so many ways to shape a sweater, there's only so many ways to shape a sock.
Right.
And you know, if you're going to use a raglan shaping or a set-in sleeve, like there's only so many ways you can vary that. So people are going to have ideas that result in similar patterns.
Right. Well, so you turn design, knitwear design now into your career for now. So how organized you are with it? How do you plan the whole release timing? How do you turn it into like full-time business?
I think I have like a dream of how I want it to be organized, and I'm not there yet. I'm trying to get there. And I definitely am thinking now more about when are things going to get released. I've got a cardigan that I've been working on that's, you know, my first really lightweight summery thing. And, you know, definitely planning out like when does that make sense to release seasonally, and how do I need to shift my other patterns around to make sure that's out at the right time. But I definitely don't have like a schedule of this is coming out on this day and this is coming out on that day. And so I think, you know, I'm still learning about how to do it. And I'm, you know, with each new project, I'm shifting the structure more and more, and gaining more planning. I sort of have a ideal of where I'd like to be in terms of my workflow, that at any given time I want to have one thing that I'm, you know, test knitting, one thing, or, you know, that I have in test knitting, one thing that I'm actively writing the pattern for, and one thing that I'm designing and knitting. Right now I'm not there. I've gotten a bunch of things designed and I'm a little backlogged on the writing.
Well, when you plan your designs, right, do you think, okay, I'm designing sweaters, so I also need to design a hat and a pair of socks and a scarf to keep it like variety going? Or the inspiration hits and this is what you're going to work on, disregarding the like logistics of it?
I think it's been closer to the latter. I love sweaters. Sweaters are my baby, and I love knitting and designing sweaters. So that has been a lot of my focus. I say that having, you know, any more accessory patterns out now than sweaters, but I have a lot of sweaters in the works. But I do try and think about like, okay, let's balance this. I can't, my designs are complicated. I can't write up a sweater pattern in 2 weeks. So I need to, you know, get some smaller things out there. both so that I can get some releases out more often, and so that people who might want to knit them might not get so fatigued of just knitting a new sweater every time.
Right. Well, so talking about sweaters, they are complicated sweaters because you're using complicated techniques. How difficult it is to grade them? Because like sometimes what the stitches that work on one size laid down like completely different on another size, and like what looks amazing in one size can look like slightly ridiculous on another, and like end up looking strange, right? Like how do you learn how to grade? What was that journey like? What did you learn in that, and how difficult it is now?
It is it has been a learning experience. So the first sweater I designed was actually my Hidden Forest sweater, and I knit it, and I take my approach to knitting or to designing is I design on the needles and I take really copious notes of what I'm doing while I do it, and then I write up patterns later, which I know is the opposite of what a lot of people do. But I made it and went, I really don't know what I'm doing with grading. Like I can figure it out. I'm not like, I don't worry that it's a thing I can't do. But I'm not sure how to do this. And at the time I finished that, I had the yarn to start my first braided bread sweater, and I just got started on that and realized that the body shape for this was more intuitive to me and was going to be easier to grade. So I graded this first, and it's knit flat in pieces, and has a set in sleeve shaping. And I had taken some classes on like how to design or how to knit a set in sleeve sweater from scratch with no pattern, just based on your body measurements. And so that layout just was easier to me because I had more experience with it. And I did a bunch of research looking at different people's size charts and trying to put all that information together. And I guess, knowing about how a design is going to look on different body types is something that I'm still learning. So I think there are some things that I probably could continue to improve on with that. But I figured out, let's learn to grade on something a little bit easier, and then I jumped into this. And grading that the Hidden Forest sweater, I learned that there are some design choices that I made that made grading much, much, much harder. And I made a mistake in early on in the grading and had to redo the whole thing, and it took forever, and I was really annoyed. So I basically had to redesign the entire yoke for every size.
Well, when you talk about it, right, the whole design process, like, first of all, you have to come up with the idea, then you have to knit the whole thing, then you have to grade it, then you have to write a pattern, you have to come up with the romance, which you don't like to write, you have to market it. Like there is like so much going on into like each and every design. Do you ever have qualms about like pricing your patterns? Or because I feel like it's the most unappreciated profession or one of them, just because of how much time goes into doing, redoing, swatching. Like sometimes I see designers like while they're making something and they would share their progress with me, and I'm just like, they'll swatch the same thing 6 times until they find the yarn that actually works for that particular pattern, right, that shows the right stitch definition.
Yep.
And then like they would put the pattern for whatever, $8, $9, and people would complain about how expensive it is. Yep. Like, does that part frustrate you?
Yes. I think the prices that I've set so far, my approach was to look at, a big range of other designers and see how they were pricing their patterns and try and price in comparable ways. And I feel like that's been a big discussion in, the people I'm following in the fiber industry lately of, these prices really are undervaluing the work of designers. And yeah, I would love to be able to charge a price that more appropriately reflects the amount of work that goes into these designs. But I think, we need the community to value that work and be willing to pay those prices. So
have you tried like educating people about the process? Like, do you think it's the designer's job as the community, I'm not even mean just you, right, to showcase the amount of work that actually goes into design? Because I feel like a lot of people just don't realize how much work goes into it.
I think I share more of my process than a lot of designers do. I think, I see a lot of designers where you won't see a pattern until you see the final modeled photographs of the finished item. And I am sharing, from my cast on what I'm doing. But that leaves out a lot of the cognitive work of grading and pattern writing. And, it's hard for me to take a pretty picture of my spreadsheet and share that on social media. So I think that we could do some to share what more of what goes into it, but I'm not sure that I think in some ways you don't look inside the sausage factory like this. The knitters sometimes just want to enjoy the knitting and don't always want to think about how much work went into it.
Right. Well, let's talk about your number one fan, your mom.
Yes.
So she's like very actively supporting you in this thing. Is she like blown away by the difficulty of projects you create now?
Yes. Yeah. So she test knit my scarf for me, which was my sort of learn to do brioche cables, and she got through it, but there was a lot of phone calls and what am I doing wrong, and she's sort of my exemplar of why I talk about fearless knitting, because she tells me, oh, I couldn't do what you're doing, and I'm like, yes, you could absolutely do it, you just need to be brave and try it. And yeah, she definitely looks at the things I design now and goes, no, I could never make that, which is why I have a version of this sweater that I guess I need to sew the second sleeve on. It's still in pieces, but it's going to her at Christmas because she insisted she needed one and wanted me to make it for her.
That's lovely though. Is your family in general, like your husband and your family, your friends, how supportive they are? How much do you rely on their cheering you on and like because I'm sure you have moments of doubt and like, why am I not just pursuing my PhD job and like doing that instead of sitting and designing and trying to market it? Do you rely on them a lot?
I do. I think, I've got my knitting group and my best friend who knows nothing at all about knitting, but is a huge cheerleader for me and, is so excited about everything I produce. And my mom and my aunts are, very much behind me. And, hearing them talk about how much they support what I'm doing is a big boost and really helps. My husband is very supportive. He's a math professor, so he can get into the nitty gritty of like, well, think about the statistics of how many people succeed and where this, and I'm like, he's like, I support you, you're doing everything right, but all the math, and I'm like, I'm just not going to think about the math. And just do what I love and keep putting it out there. And the people around me are very supportive of that.
Right. Well, I absolutely love your designs. I think you're doing a fantastic job. And I actually really love the fact that you don't shy away from the most difficult techniques out there, because I feel like we do need that variety. We need designers who do designs for like mindless knitting in front of TV that you can just relax and not pay attention. but I also feel like there is, we need people like you who's going to challenge us and show us that knitting is not that difficult and everybody can do the most difficult things out there, and still enjoy it. And it's funny because I was just recently interviewing Stacy from Soap Sack. So it's the charity company that basically like the knitters from all over the world knitting this pouch for the soap, because apparently like all the food banks, they run low on the hygiene pack, things and like necessities like that. And so that was her idea, to like bring the soap to the food banks. So they have volunteers from like all over the world knitting it. And we had this discussion how it's like a perfect opportunity for any kind of knitter or crocheter or sewing enthusiast, because you can make it as simple as you want, right? Just like totally plain, or you can incorporate different colors, or you can even take like Japanese knitting Bible and create this like, most elaborate cabled designs as well. Like it gives any knitter or any crocheter an opportunity to do what they like, right? What they prefer to do. And I feel like that's what you're doing. You're giving the opportunity to people who want to challenge themselves, who want to try all these techniques, to actually do it. So I'm very glad that like we've met, and I love having you on my show, and I love having you as a friend and as a local knitting guru of the difficult stuff. So thank you so very much for being a guest of my channel today. I really enjoyed getting to know you better. And
thank you very much for having me on. It was great to get to talk to you more.
So hopefully we'll meet again for coffee sometime soon,
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, hold on one sec. That went super